видите гласът от метрото. Той е американец и всъщност епизода с него е заснет на съвсем друго място, по съвсем друг начин. Може би ще се замислите, че американската мечта не е за всеки. И има дори американци, които предпочитат да живеят в България.
Здравейте, казвам се Ерик Холзи и аз съм от Вашингтон, DC, от щатите. И сега живеем в България, защото женен съм с българка и имам фирма тук, но по-важно, че моите приятели и тук и моите живота е тук. Живеем тук за около 9 години. Бях тук за първ път, защото аз съм специалист на българска история и бях студент в Американският университет. И така, сега имам фирма, работя в маркетинг, писател съм, редактор съм, voice actor, не знам точно се казва, voice actor на български, много различни неща и работя с комиците Fulbright, аз съм на the corporate board на Fulbright и така, винаги търся нови интересни проекти. Американската култура е много различна от българския. Една важна неща за аз и жена ми е разликата между high context и low context cultures. This part I need to explain in English. So like a high context culture, like in the US, people will explain things to you. Like they'll say, so this is how this is going to be. They'll really go out of your way. They'll kind of assume you don't know what's going on. Bulgaria is very different. They kind of assume like you can figure it out. So people won't tend to go out of their way to explain things. It's like, it's your responsibility, like figure it out, you should know. So, you know, Bulgarians I know go to the US and sometimes they feel insulted, like why does everyone treat me like an idiot and explain everything to me? But then vice versa, foreigners come here and they're like, why won't anyone explain what's going on? So that's a huge difference. Otherwise, like work culture is very different. Americans tend to be a bit of workaholics and sometimes they don't value just life as much, and that's one of the reasons why I like living here more. Coming from a family of workaholics, it's nice to live in a place where I can relax and have a bit more balance in my life. From America, I miss the most. The obvious answer is my friends and my family. Like when I go back to the US, that's what I want to do. I want to see my friends and family. But besides that, what people don't expect is like I miss food. Even though like I think the food in Bulgaria is amazing, and I'm a huge chef. Like I love to cook, and like the availability of international ingredients here has been changing so fast, and now you can get so much. But still, when I go back to the US, I want to eat Ethiopian food, Korean food, Vietnamese food, Peruvian food, like Mexican food. Like I'm from a very international part of the US, so I love going back and just like trying world cuisine and things. But yeah, world cuisine is coming to Sophia very fast these days. How do we solve problems in America? Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, definitely like, I think maybe like the mentality, the approach is quite different in the sense that like in the United States, I think there's less of a tendency to imagine things are kind of a conspiracy. Like, but in Bulgaria, a lot of the times, like you're presented with some problem and like very often the first thinking is like, someone did this to it. Like there's some secret hidden forces behind this. Whereas in the US, most people don't think that way. They kind of take the straightforward, like, no, just here's the problem. So there's that. But also I think the other big kind of cultural difference is that in Bulgaria, a lot of times you solve problems by using your networks. It's like, I know a guy. And this is also kind of a legacy of communism, that like, that's how you really got things done. And you know, years ago, a former roommate of mine explained an element of this that really stuck with me from like his grandparents and how this legacy is filtered down. That even today, sometimes if it's easier to solve a problem the straightforward way, in Bulgaria, you might still do it through your contacts. Because there's this sense that like, if you do it the straightforward way, you're maybe a sucker. Like that's how everyone does it. But like, if you're really somebody, if you're not a sucker, like you should do it through a friend or something. And so that's, sometimes it can seem weird from an American perspective. You'll see someone going about a problem in like a totally roundabout way that seems way less easy But sometimes that's why. It's this cultural sense of like, I don't want to get kind of screwed over. I want to get cheated by someone, so I'm going to use my contacts and things. So yeah, I think Americans can be a little more trusting and a little more straightforward in how they solve problems. In Bulgaria, how do people accept me? I think in general, like, people in Bulgaria are very accepting of me, in part just because, like, I speak Bulgarian reasonably well. You know, being a specialist in Bulgarian history and like understanding Bulgarian history and culture and really taking that seriously and not just wanting to be, I mean, I've met foreigners who've lived here 10 years and like they can barely order in a restaurant and they just sort of act like, you know, I imagine like British imperial officials in India 100 years ago, just sort of like, yeah, moving about and everyone should figure out things around me. So I think kind of trying to be humble and be useful, because that's another one of the reasons why I like living here, decided to live here, is I felt that in Bulgaria I could have a positive impact, and that was a lot easier than back in Washington, D.C. So yeah, people tend to be very open, very accepting, and I haven't had too much trouble with that. Now the next hint is under the flower. I see a lot of plants, but no flowers, so I got. So in Bulgaria, everyone thinks that, and I can fill this in, but in fact, okay, I'd say like in Bulgaria, everyone thinks that everything in the West is better, just blanket. You know, I know with my wife, you know, people always ask her, like, and even me as well, it's like, so, you know, when are you guys moving to the US? They're like, so you're gonna go, you know, move to the US, right? And they just completely assume that that's our plan. And it's not. Like, our plan is to start a family and build a life here in Bulgaria. And for me, it's like, you know, the West, the United States in particular, like it's better much better for certain things and much worse for other things. And it really just depends on what you want and what you value. I mean, for example, if colleagues have asked me, like, how does healthcare work in the US? And I explain the system to them and they're like, surely that's wrong, that's insane. Or I explain, you know, sometimes how elections work and things, or how our government works. And they're like, how could that be the case? That seems crazy. And so, you know, I think it's like if you are willing to work super hard and you want desperately to sort of make money and be successful, yeah, the US is maybe a better place. But like if you value other things, if you value more time in nature, time with your family and stuff like that, I think here's a great place to be. Assuming your family's here. It's harder for me. So yeah, people assume it's all better in the West, but like it really depends on a lot of things. So here I'm feeling and realize, so I can kind of fill in those gaps. You know, it's funny, people will ask you, how do you feel in Bulgaria? But it's like, I've lived here almost a third of my entire life. And so like, it just feels normal. I mean, this is just where I've been living most of the time since I was like 20 years old. So like, I feel normal here. This is home. You know, occasionally frustrated with some things, but like I would be frustrated with other things if I was living in the US. But you know, over time living here, I'm trying to think, what have I realized here? Obviously a lot, because you know, in 9 years of your life, you always realize a lot if you're living right. What did I realize? That like, you know, I think when I was younger, I was more ambitious. Like I wanted to succeed and do kind of big, fancy things. And I wanted to have like a job title that my family would be proud of and think, yeah, you're doing stuff. But over time, I think I kind of chilled out a lot. And I realized like, yeah, so what? It's hard for me to describe what I do because I have my own little business and I do lots of things. So I don't have a fancy title or whatever. But you know, I get to work on cool projects and I get to work with interesting people, and you know, I became less interested in doing something that seems outwardly impressive to other people and more concerned with just living my life. And I think that's made me much happier. So now I need to leave the room. So people here overdo something at the expense of something. So what do people here overdo? I mean, certainly like it can feel like people overdo bureaucracy. That's what I've been doing my whole morning here. Although I have to remind myself that like the US has plenty of bureaucracy as well. But yeah, sometimes it can feel kind of a little dehumanizing. It's like you overdo all the steps and things, and it can you know, it can feel like you're not welcome. You know, so like eventually I'm hoping to, again, kind of apply for Bulgarian citizenship. And people are like, why do you want Bulgarian citizenship? And for me, it's almost just like the feeling that like, this is my home. And when I have to deal with the bureaucracy of renewing my residency every year, it's like, it doesn't feel like I belong. It makes me feel like I'm a guest that's like, you know, barely welcome is something. It's not a very nice process. And so, yeah, sometimes that bureaucracy is overdone at the expense of Bulgaria feeling kind of maybe welcoming and easy to live in. Although, yeah, again, everywhere has its awful bureaucracy. It's far from a monopoly here. I mean, I lived in Hungary, and I think registering there was just as much of a pain. In Bulgaria, I want to change. You know, so I'm definitely a very political person. So, you know, I'm from Washington, D.C. You know, I come from two generations of people who've worked in politics. I've worked in U.S. politics and on Capitol Hill and in the Congress when I was younger. And, you know, I always explain to people who try to, you know, sometimes people ask me to try to wrap their head around Bulgarian politics and things. And I explained, like, you know, I've got degrees in political science. I'm super into politics. I try to follow it incredibly closely. I've read books about it, and I can barely figure out what's going on. So, you know, for me, you know, there's plenty of things, but I think I wish Bulgarian politics was a bit more about what people believe in. It feels like very few of the parties seem to have like philosophical beliefs. So, you know, when Slavi Trifonov's new party came in, I looked like, what are their beliefs? And like, it's some dumb stuff that basically contradicts itself. Like the political platform makes no sense, but I don't think anyone's voting for them for the platform. Or years ago, when I asked a friend, like, Bulgaria has a 10% flat tax, like, which party implemented that? He said, the socialists, which according to political science makes no sense. But it's because, you know, I think most parties here tend to act in these kind of narrow interests and not really based on like core principles. And I think that helps make people feel disassociated from politics. Where you're voting for a party, it doesn't feel like you're voting for a set of ideas. It feels like you're voting for like some people to run things for a while. And I don't think that's a good way for politics to be. So here I really like. So as part of this is just living in the city, but living in central Sofia, like I love the feeling of just being in a community, of being around people. Because I grew up in the suburbs where it's like you go everywhere by car, you just kind of move between these like private spaces and just here walking around and just seeing everyone living their lives around me, like I really like that feeling because it feels like I'm in a real place with actual people and not in some like sterile car bubble that just travels between businesses. And so, you know, I love going to the market, I love sitting in the park and just sort of being surrounded by people. It really kind of energizes me. A lot of people recognize my voice. There are two reasons for this. Yeah, one, I have a podcast about Bulgarian history I've been doing for, I think, about 7 years now. The Bulgarian History Podcast, and but then also I do a lot of voice acting, including the English language voice for the new 3rd Metro line. So I have had that occasionally happen. Someone sort of overhears me in a restaurant and is like, wait, are you the guy who did this or that? So I like to joke that I'm like a D-list celebrity in Bulgaria. Or maybe F-list if there is such a thing. Why do I love Bulgarian history so much? So, you know, to me, initially, Bulgarian history was super interesting just because like it was so different. I mean, the book that got me interested was a book called Crown of Thorns by Stefan Gurev, and it's a biography of Tsar Boris III. And, you know, it's covering kind of the interwar period in the 20th century. And you know, this is a period that like I had studied the European history part of that a lot. And Bulgaria's experience was just so different. It was so unexpected and so fascinating. In particular, learning about like the radical agrarian movement and these huge political movements that like you never hear about if you read kind of more general history. And then, you know, through my podcast covering the First Bulgarian Empire, the Second Bulgarian Empire, all in the Ottoman period, I love just discovering these interesting, unexpected stories and finding history that just, to me, doesn't get enough credit. You know, it's remarkable to me that you can read all these books about, you know, the 9th, 10th century European history, and like the First Bulgarian Empire seems like a complete afterthought. No one seems to care that much about it. And in fact, I'm now in the late stages of publishing a book that's a history of the First Bulgarian Empire in English, because literally that book's been written once and it was published in 1930. And if you want to read a complete history of the First Bulgarian Empire in English, that's the only book. and I don't think it's even in print anymore. You can like find it online because I think it's in public domain now. But that's where I see Bulgarian history. It's like, it's fascinating. There's so many interesting, unexpected twists and turns, and it's so underappreciated and under-researched. So there's a lot I feel I can add to it. So I will tell you one funny story. Lots of options. What's a good... So, back in 2009, 2010, I was a student at the American University, studying Bulgarian. And after that year, like, I spoke okay. But like 2 years later, I moved back to Bulgaria, and I go to Sophia, and I'm trying to like take some lessons with a private tutor to kind of improve my language skills. And I discovered that evidently I speak Bulgarian in like the kind of Macedonian, like Blagoevgrad, Pirin Macedonian dialect. And so like completely without realizing it, she keeps yelling at me like, ne govori като Macedonец, like stop speaking like a Macedonian. And like I had no idea I was doing that. But now after living in Sofia for so many years, like when I go back to Blagoevgrad, I listen, I'm like, oh God, like now I hear it now. Like now I can really hear the dialect difference. So it was funny to me, like I ended up learning a dialect and having no idea I was learning a dialect. But thankfully I wasn't living in Bansko or something, because then surely no one could understand me. But definitely coming from the US, where like dialects are really subtle and much lower, it was interesting coming to a place where dialects can be pretty strong, even just a few kilometers away from one place. So yeah, it was funny accidentally learning that and then kind of unlearning it. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Ако ви е харесал епизода ни, изчакайте следващия. Може да ни последвате в Instagram, Channel for подкаст, и в Facebook, Channel for, и да видите също така подкастите, които направихме, които се намират в нашия сайт. И не само, но влезте в нашия сайт channel4podcast.com.